I was a little kid and people would ask what my parents did for a living, I would say my mom's a pilot and my dad's a mountain climber. And that was actually true. My mom was a captain for Alaska Airlines, and my dad climbed K2 in Mount Everest without oxygen. And his company, Mountain Madness, specialized in getting their clients to some of the highest mountains in the world. And then, 3 days before my 9th birthday, I got out of bed to the sound of my mom sobbing in the hallway. And I somehow knew to ask, Did Dad die? And she said, yeah, honey. They can't get him off the mountain. Elizabeth Berrien is quoted as saying, "We never truly get over a loss, but we can move forward and evolve from it." In this piece, we examine how the death of one's father at a young age leads him on a journey to accepting his father's death that he never thought he needed to have. Since Dad, by Andy Fisher-Price. My father was Scott Fisher. He was the American guide and was now referred to as the 1996 Everest disaster, in which an unexpected storm struck Mount Everest in the peak of climbing season, causing 8 people to die. And it was a news story that kind of just didn't go away that year, as me and my 5-year-old sister Katie were just trying to comprehend and adjust to this new life. And the world's focus on my dad's story continued as John Krakauer's Into Thin Air was published. And Into Thin Air was so successful that they just cranked out a made-for-TV version. And I remember that I was not allowed to watch it. I still remember the sounds of my mom crying and cursing through the halls of my bedroom the night that it aired. And then, a couple of years later, I think I was in middle school, I was up late watching TV with my sister, and we noticed it was on. And it almost felt like we were doing something dirty. Almost like watching an X-rated movie or something, but we were just a couple of kids. Watching an actor play our dad as the guy who's so arrogant and dumb that from the beginning of the movie you know he's not going to make it. And they gave him this catchphrase, "I'm invincible!" And I think we just felt embarrassed for each other, for my family, for Dad. And so we changed the channel, but we changed it back just in time to watch him die. And they did this slow, dramatic zoom in on his face as he shuddered his last words, "I'm invincible." And Katie and I, we were just having a hard time figuring out what all this was about. Because the Scott Fisher we knew was just the coolest person ever. I mean, all of our friends were his friends, and our friends' parents became his friends, and it seemed like everyone was saying, "Man, he loved you kids. He loved you kids so much." So I was just trying to figure out why this movie made him out to be some cocky, ignorant jerk who seemed deserving of his fate. And then I started to wonder, is this what the rest of the world thought he was like? Was any of this true? Normally, when somebody loses a parent, it's a big deal for the first few months, the first year even, and then it just slowly fades away. It becomes a painful part of this person's past that no one really talks about. But in the case of our dad, I mean, he became this character in all these books, this movie, and now, so it just took a lot longer for it to fade away. But eventually it did. And then I got a text from a friend saying, "Jake Gyllenhaal's playing your dad in a movie." And I was not stoked to hear that news, because it meant reopening a painful part of my past that I thought was gone. But I went to see Everest, last year, and it wasn't nearly as terrible or as offensive as that first movie had been. But I still didn't enjoy it. I still felt sick watching his death scene. I mean, I don't know anyone else besides my sister who has watched two different actors play their dad die on screen. And a couple of weeks before the movie came out, Katie and I had lunch with a client on my dad's 96 trip. She was the one who paid for the construction of the Chorten. It's the stone monument that Sherpas built to remember climbers that passed away in the Himalayas. And we told her that for years we'd seen pictures of it, but we never found the time or the money to go out and see it for ourselves. And she couldn't believe that we'd never seen it, so she says, "You guys have to go. I'll pay for your flights. You need to see it." And so 2 weeks later, I'm on a flight to Nepal, and I catch my first glimpse of Mount Everest. And I think I almost wanted it to be this emotional experience, because for the first time, I was staring at my father's gravesite. But I almost had to push away feelings of guilt, because Katie and I, we were just having so much fun. I mean, we're best friends, and we don't get to see each other that often. So it was just her and I hiking, having a great old hilarious time on the most beautiful place on the planet. And then, the night before we made our ascent to see the Chorten, we got Wi-Fi at our lodge, and we stumbled across this article. It was interviewing another client on my dad's 96 trip, Dale Cruz. Dale had gotten altitude sickness, and my dad had accompanied him down to base camp. And instead of staying down at base camp like he probably should have, my dad met back up with the rest of his crew high up on Everest. Many people believe that extra trip down and back up is what led to his exhaustion, and ultimately his death. The article quoted him as saying, "His picture is still in our refrigerator. He was one of my best friends, and he helped save my life." And out of nowhere, Katie and I were both crying because I don't know the significance of the trip had found ourselves after all. The next morning was the only day on our trek that it snowed, and we walked up what seemed like this endless hill. Then the ground levels out, and we see hundreds and hundreds of Chortens. And I thought about how each one was just remembering a climber that took a trip into the mountains and never came back. And then I saw my dad's. It was bigger than the most of the rest of them. It was this big painted white boulder that said, "In memory of Scott Eugene Fisher." And up until that moment, I thought that I had fully grieved my father's death. That the process has completed itself years ago, and I was proud of my take on it, because I wasn't a victim of my father's death anymore. But somehow, standing there that day, I just got humbled with this wave of grief. It was like for the first time, my body was acknowledging the existence of someone who was directly responsible for my existence. And all of the articles, books, movies, none of them had been as real as just staring at that rock. And it occurred to us that he's still parenting us. Because if he had been an insurance salesman who died in a car crash, we wouldn't have found ourselves staring at a stone monument in Nepal. And I don't think I'll ever really get to know who he was as a person. Katie and I are still discovering qualities about him by finding traits that we share that don't seem to come from Mom. And I don't think I'll ever know what happened on Mount Everest in 1996. But what I do know is that he is still our father. And he is still gone.